Welcome, everybody, to this episode of the Benjamin Anthony Show, a product of the MirYam Institute. It's Tuesday, April 21st, and at the time of this recording, Israelis are celebrating our independence. We're doing so, of course, against the backdrop of a very tenuous ceasefire agreement between the United States, Iran, and Israel, as well as another ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. Vice President J.D. Vance is reported to have delayed his departure toward Islamabad for what were supposed to be further talks with the Iranians due to Iranian refusal to commit to the talks. And Israel is coordinating with the United States for a potential return to the fighting if it is required to do so against Iran. Now, that all adds up to a time of great uncertainty for Israel and for the United States of America, and certainly for the Iranians. But I believe that as such, a question that we ought to ask is whether or not at this very moment, Israel is safer now than it was prior to October 7th, given the events that have transpired since that awful day. And to answer that question is our senior in-house analyst at the MirYam Institute and internationally renowned scholar, John Spencer. John, great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me, Benjamin, and happy Independence Day.
Thank you very much indeed. Let's jump right into this. You have written an exclusive op-ed, a long-form analysis of Israel's national security positioning, I would say, at this particular point. And the title of that op-ed is Israel Safer? We're going to put a link to that in our show notes, and our readers can view it on the MirYam Institute website on the homepage, as well as in the commentary section. So, John, let's begin with a quote from there. You ask rhetorically, is Israel safer today from a national security standpoint than it was on October 6th, 2023? You go on to answer. The answer is yes. Tell us why.
Yeah, and actually, thank you for giving me more space to write it. It's not an easy question, and some people might even ask why now ask that question. And I think it's important. I mean, since October 7th, 2023, there's been a lot that's happened, though the world has changed, of course, on that day. And for me, we can have this much larger conversation about Israel and every aspect. So in the article, I attack it from every October 6th situation, both strategically, as in what was kind of the operatus modem or status quo with Israel and its threats to its survival, right? And I break it down by those threats, of course, starting with the Islamic regime in Iran, but also this ring of fire that I know you and others, analysts at MirYam, are very familiar with, that Iran had built over decades, of course, in reflection of Independence Day, going back to 1948, when 5 Arab armies attack Israel. A few years later, 3 Arab armies. A few years later, 2 Arab armies. And of course, on October 7th, a terror army built by the Islamic regime in Iran. This article, I try to break down every front, of course, and some people, and I really hate to say, that's tactics. Let's talk about strategy. I really am taking on what is national security for a nation, right? A sovereign nation with sovereign borders. What is considered an evaluation of its national security. I take it by analyzing all the threats. Of course, I talk about the Islamic regime in Iran. How much of a threat is it today as compared to what it was on October 6th? Any nation or entity's ability to wage war is a combination of its means and its will, right? So with Iran, we can look at what means does it have to attack Israel? How much will does it have today compared to October 6th? And there are a lot of people in my research, interviewing everybody from the prime minister to Ambassador Dermer. Prior to October 6th, there was a lot of thinking about what might happen in the event of a scenario of Iran attacking, Hezbollah attacking, all of them coordinated, Iran activating the entire ring of fire simultaneously. What would happen and what could Israel defend itself? All of these factors factor into what was the strategic paradigm that I argue in the article on October 6th, which was a lot of one thing, what I call rocket diplomacy, that Hamas and Hezbollah could launch rockets at Israel. Israel by necessity built this world-renowned air defense system. So it led to this political situation, because strategy is the pursuit of political goals, where not just Israel's citizens, but some people in the external world would see these attacks, which were nonstop, basically, from Hamas and Hezbollah. As, that's what happens. You can knock those down. So it's, the retaliation, and I think it was Ambassador Dermot who said, ping pong. Hezbollah would attack, and Israel would attack and hit that launcher that attacked us. Now is kind of the status quo because of many diplomatic reasons, internally, but also internationally, right? When, to wage full war, although legitimately you attack a nation, Article 51, United Nations, just like basically after October 7th, every nation of the world has the right to act in self-defense. But for some reason, prior to October 6th, for many reasons, Israel was in this state where there was this rocket diplomacy of what was viewed as kind of the norm in responding to a threshold of an attack. And then you had the Islamic regime in Iran after October 7th attack Israel in April of 2024, October of 2024, and of course, after the 12-day war. All of these things matter, but I try to break it apart by enemies and say today, and this is where I get to with all the details that I try to provide. And, in God I trust, all others bring data on what is the status of the opposition to Israel's survival, to Israel's national security. Is it safer today across every front, both on its borders, so Hezbollah, West Bank, Gaza, Syria, but also internationally with Iran and the Houthis? And I try to break all those down and say, who's stronger today? All of the Iranian proxies are either dismantled, destroyed, degraded. So just from a kind of a realist approach, they're all weaker today. They're not emboldened. And same thing with the Islamic regime in Iran. And really important, the conclusion is that the strategic paradigm is not what it was on October 6th. If somebody attacks Israel today, they don't get a ping pong back. They get a bowling ball back. And Israel today can attack a threat that is imminent, that it sees, like a Hezbollah about to launch a rocket, or a Hamas member planning an attack. That is a different strategic paradigm. So at the strategic level, all the way down to the tactical level, Israel is stronger today. Its enemies are weaker.
Yeah, and I would encourage everybody again to go and to read the opinion piece that you've written. It's very detailed. I think that it's wonderful grounds for consideration and thought. Just to parry off what you termed rocket diplomacy, it takes me back to my own service, John, in 2006. Unbelievably, nearly 2 decades ago, the first war, as the listeners might recall, in which I served was the Second Lebanon War inside Lebanon. And I remember when we would variously come back to Israel and quickly grab a shower or something to eat, whatever it was, that we were living in a time where if a rocket was fired into the air by Hezbollah, it landed. Now, where it landed, that might have been up for question, depending on the degree of accuracy, but it landed. And one of the memories that I have from that time is that I was taking a shower. The rocket landed very close indeed to the shower. The shower walls actually dismantled, and I had to run to a shelter on the kibbutz from which we were deploying. And I mentioned that because the fact that munitions went up and then came down resulted in Israel having to make very bold, very consequential and swift decisions, such as to launch a ground maneuver, for example, into southern Lebanon. Now, that operation, that war, has been criticized a great many times. I've always felt that criticism was overdone, to say the very least. And the reason is, as imperfect as it was, because we were fighting a non-state actor, it did bring quiet to the border in a way that, for example, Israel's ping-pong operations in the era of the vaunted air defense systems that Israel has, specifically around the Gaza Strip, after Hamas came into power and this rocket diplomacy really began, in contrast to the periods of quiet that rocket diplomacy brought about, our fight in the absence of air defense in 2006 brought about close to 20 years of quiet on that border, imperfect as it may be. Whereas in regard to Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad inside the Gaza Strip, we ended up with a cadence of having to go in and launch a campaign, typically not a ground campaign, incidentally, once every 2 to 3 years. So in some ways, we were a victim of the success of our air defense, because what it gave us, in my estimation, I've said this several times, was it gave us the condition of analysis paralysis. We had the time to think, the time to consider, and dare I say it, the time not to take conclusive action. As you say in your piece, as Israel complied with that status quo, our enemies decided how they could maneuver and advance within that status quo. And I think that came to a head very clearly on October 7th by way of the invasion that we faced from Hamas into southern Israel. Tell us about how the enemy maneuvered within that status quo of rocket diplomacy, whereas Israel perhaps was somewhat staggered or halted by it.
Yeah, this is a great point. And I talk about it in the very beginning of the, not only the rocket diplomacy, but the containment strategy that Israel deployed. Again, there is no simple answer to these, and there is no one government or one person that led to these. And people have written, and I don't talk about it in the failures of October 7th. It was a failure in strategic doctrine that evolved for many reasons. One of these being the containment strategy, that you had contained the enemy. But you're right, within even the rocket diplomacy, while Israel had this world-renowned air defense, the enemies were increasing in their rocket supply and capability. And again, going to Hezbollah, which is the crown jewel of the Islamic regime proxy strategy, I mean, it amassed this arsenal of up to like 150,000 or 100,000 rockets. And I remember in my research realizing, of course, there's a hierarchy of short-range rockets, which are more Hamas, where they're cutting up their water pipes and making. But then you have Hezbollah, which was advancing thanks to Iran in medium to long-range, precision-guided rockets, and building this within this decades of not only rocket diplomacy, containment strategy, but also international system of Israel not being allowed to do defensive tactics. Even if you talk UNIFIL in southern Lebanon, watching this terror army amass the greatest arsenal of rockets of a non-state actor was a part of that. So that is right to say that while Israel did these things for certain reasons, both in the rocket diplomacy, containment strategy, and there are of course advanced historical case studies within this, like you said, Lebanon, even Gaza, 2008, other variations that are all part of this story. But it's a fact that the enemies of Israel within this status quo, containment strategy, rocket diplomacy, retaliation, really what was acceptable in retaliation below the level of armed conflict, the enemies grew stronger, and so strong to the point where there was factoring into Israel's strategic thinking that, which I get into the article, if you now that they have grown in this within this paradigm to a certain level, if you do anything, you'll spark this larger war, which we can't accept because of the cost. So that's where we have with like the killing of Nasrallah, which was, for many people, and I remember talking to them after October 7th, that was viewed, because the Islamic regime in Iran said it was, as the don't do it, or we will wage this destructive, we'll destroy you war, which ended up for many reasons not coming true. And that bold action by Israel's government was taken and did fracture this untouchable proxy force and give Lebanon some breathing room. All of these things are wait and see. But within that, they grew stronger. And I hope, Benjamin, we get into that other aspect that I do talk about, when somebody might say, okay, you're talking about hard power. What about Israel's soft power in the world? And this is where those who have said that Israel is isolated is viewed as a pariah state on the international. Again, in God I trust, all others bring data. That's just not true. The Abraham Accords hold. You have Arab nations defending Israel, like Jordan during the April 2024 attack by Iran. But then you didn't have like United States saying, don't counteract. But you have large agreements with Germany, Azerbaijan, India. Israel is doing very well, national security wise, not just in its hard power, its enemies degraded, fractured, the strategic paradigm changed, but also in its allies, because there is a peace through strength aspect to this that I truly believe means today Israel is stronger than it was on October 6th.
Yeah, so John, I want to deal with maybe a couple of the fronts that you've gone through. As you said, your article goes around the horn. I think what's on people's minds right now is what has been done? What is the assessment of what has been carried out against Iran, both from the 12-day war up to the present moment? Talk to us about how operations against the regime and its capabilities and its threats toward Israel, and frankly, I would argue to the Western world, talk to us about where those stand, what has been achieved, and why, in the event of the ceasefire holding, you believe that Israel is in a safer position.
Yeah, it's a great, if we just took that, I could have gone on, of course, for the full article, just taking that um, aggressor, the Islamic regime in Iran, what it was building in its missile capabilities, what it wanted to build, what it was building in its nuclear program, which is what it says was for to destroy Israel. We could break that down very specifically since basically the April 2024, October 2024, June 2025, and now we're in this the uncertainty of what's going on right now in the Operation Epic Fury, Operation Roaring Lion, as opposed to the 12-day war. It's just, again, I'm a realist. The facts are is that, especially Iran, its ability to attack Israel is less today. Its strategy of, which was, you've got to give your enemy credit, a very legitimate strategy of building this ring of fire around Israel in order to do proxy warfare. Doesn't matter if you're Sunni, Shia, Iran supported them with billions of dollars. I mean, they sent billions of dollars to what's left of Hezbollah just last year because it's not done with this strategy. But so let's talk the 12-day war and be truthful on what Israel did during that operation unilaterally. So it sent a signal to not just Iran, but all of its enemies that Israel had a capability that nobody ever believed it had, which is the ability to do long range, to include striking farther than it's ever in its history, first with Iran and then with the Houthis in Yemen. Its ability to do the operations, I think, should be given its own chapter in history of what it did on the 12-day war. Of course, the Mossad intelligence penetration of the Islamic regime to do the operation on the opening day that kills all the generals, that kills all the nuclear scientists, that does degrade and pause and roll back the nuclear program, attrit ballistic missile launchers, so much so. And I think the straight facts is, if you look at what happened in April of 2024, of course, the largest ballistic missile strike of another nation by another nation in history, which was over 180 ballistic missiles, come the current operation, it doesn't try that again because Israel had a 90% success rate in stopping the missiles, a 99% rate of stopping the drone. And you've seen since Operation Epic Fury, Roaring Lion, Iran is attacking all of its neighbors more than it's trying to attack Israel. And that's because of its degraded capability and Israel showing its strength, both in offensive capability, because if you launch one missile, whatever you did to launch it is now very vulnerable to you lost that capability. And again, going to Iran's ability, it's its means. Of course, it has the will. Although, if you look at what's happened recently, of course, Israel killed 40 senior leaders during the 12-day war. That's just incredible in the history of war. Going into this war, now it's over 30 to include the supreme leader, which all this does matter for me in its will to continue to do what it thinks it can do, not just in its means, but of course in the last 40-ish days in this operation, Israel and the United States have severely taken away the Islamic regime's means to produce more means, right? Because this is what most people don't talk about. And I don't really get into the article because it's so long. What has been destroyed, not just their rocket supplies, right? They had 2,500 rockets. They wanted to get to 8,000 really rapidly to build this missile. Again, going, you can do it in the proxy element of Hezbollah. You become so great that the cost of doing anything against you becomes too much for anybody to pay. Because if Israel is actually an existential threat, Israel has to not allow that to happen, especially with a nuclear weapon. But Iran wanted this ballistic missile shield so that it could wreak this havoc, which is what Iran, for me, has really done, is validate what Israel has said, United States intelligence have said from the beginning, that it wants all these capabilities to do harm and terror and other things to everybody else. And that's what you've seen. But in the last 40 days, what was not done during the 12-day war, which was, again, we can talk to tactics, what happened, but strategically, Israel burst onto the stage as this not only willing but able nation, and as U.S. leadership has said, also willing and able and capable, the kind of ally we want in any war force, which is unique. And I think, Benjamin, you would know, but historically, like, that's just incredible that this 78-year-old nation has that ability to now fly side by side with the world's only superpower and match its capabilities and join in this very necessary operation. But what has been done in the last, so there's 12-day war, of course, strategically, this operation is rolling back the Islamic regime's capability to build another missile, to build another centrifuge, to have a navy that threaten the Strait of Hormuz. Of course, all the uncertainty, I don't know where this is going. And that's why I didn't say that Israel will be safer for the rest of time. I said it's safer today, and Iran is weaker today. And who knows what will happen in Iran from the economic costs of continuing its strategy. But if you want to do the long game, Iran bet on this strategy to destroy Israel. And as of today, that has failed miserably. And Israel has climbed out of the dust as a much stronger nation that is both stronger and safer today.
So, John, actually, I'm going to quote your article here with regard to what occurred during Operation Epic Fury and Roaring Lion, the American and the Israeli operation, respectively. And you've written here, quote, "What made this moment historic was not only the scale of distraction carried out by those two forces, but what it revealed about Israel's role alongside the United States. Israel did not operate as a dependent partner. It operated as a fully capable one. Senior U.S. defense leaders described Israel as the kind of ally the United States seeks in modern war, capable, willing, and able to operate at a level approaching parity in key domains." You go on to say, John, that general officers involved in the campaign emphasized that Israel's performance, from strike integration to intelligence and operational tempo, placed it in a category few allies occupy. And you conclude this by saying, for perhaps the first time, Israel demonstrated not just that it can defend itself, but that it can fight alongside the United States in large-scale, high-intensity operations as a true peer contributor. And again, that's in the op-ed that is currently on the MirYam Institute website and linked to in our show notes. So I think that one of the continued gripes against Israel's security establishment is that we don't actually have a national security strategy. So just before we turn to the second theater that we'll discuss, we've spoken a little bit about Iran. I want to bring a quote from the outset of your article where you define what national security actually means. And you say, national security is measured in relative capability, freedom of action, and the ability to deter or defeat threats. It is measured in threats eliminated, enemies degraded, and the military balance shifted. And you go on to state that on those terms, what has happened since October 7th is something few strategic analysts would have predicted when the smoke was still rising over southern Israel. So you've made the case that Israel has carried out, together with the United States, very significant strikes against Iran. I'm in full agreement with that. We've dealt with that on previous podcasts. I want to turn, if I may, to what is going on inside the Gaza Strip. Do you feel that Israel has managed to eliminate the threat of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, or do you feel that it has been downgrading, but that those two terror organizations are in the midst of replenishing their ranks only to pose a repeated threat against Israel in the coming years? How would you assess that from a national security point of view?
Absolutely. And this is, we could get into secure borders, and I'm sure we'll talk about the North as well. But if you're talking the southern border, and I do actually add in the West Bank, so I try to cover the whole, like you said, the whole spectrum. Absolutely, Hamas, the Palestinian Jihad in Gaza is not defeated. That's just fact, and I would never try to say otherwise. But it has been isolated. So while you can replenish your ranks, and I do, again, means and will. Yeah, they have the will. They've been radicalized uniquely in the Gaza Strip. All the containment strategy is gone. The ideals of just a smart wall with advanced technologies, all of these things that were October 6th are not there today. Of course, there is the peace plan. Of course, Hamas has said that we didn't say we disarm, but nobody, I don't think, would say that Hamas is as strong as they were on October 7th today. They're just not. They're just, the border area is more secure. And for me, what is one of the most important parts is that the border between Gaza and Egypt is more secure, right? The fact that Israel and the IDF went to painstaking methods to ensure that there's not a single tunnel going between Gaza and Egypt is significant in talking about where does this go. Of course, today we could talk about numbers of fighters, but then we got to talk about how much rocket supply do they have left? How much arms do they have left? How many tunnels do they have left? How much ground do they currently maintain power openly in? All those would be a measure for me, Benjamin. But there is, of course, a lot of work to be done. But step one, which I think we've talked about in the past, that even the United States has not been able to do in wars, which is to isolate the enemy from any even possibility of resupply, rearm, of actual capabilities, right? And that's why disarmament is so important. But as of today, yes, they have the will, many within, although there is fracturing. And the fact that they were forced, I think the number one thing is that they returned all the hostages. So just from a power dynamic, that if you would have talked to somebody a year ago, said that, well, that's just not possible. It's never going to happen. Well, it did. And because they want to survive, so they made decisions. They agreed to this 20-point plan, which actually, if it's implemented, removes them from political power, every weapon, every bit. But there's so much more work to be done. I absolutely not believe they're defeated. And I think their time is coming when, just like we are talking today, I don't know by the time this publishes if there will be a decision on whether we have a peace agreement or a continuation of it, or do we go back to dropping bombs on Iran? I think Hamas, there will be a point in the near future where there will be a decision on they're not disarming. And when I believe the IDF would be asked to continue operations to do it by force, right? Because war is the pursuit of political goals through the act of force or the threat of force to achieve those political goals. But from a hard power, soft power perspective, Hamas is not an enemy as much so as it was on October 7th. And all of the strategic paradigm of containing it, all of these things, not applying intelligence resources to it, all these things, it's just not the same world. So it's not as big of a threat. It's definitely a threat until they are no longer in power and no longer have a single rocket. All the tunnels have to be destroyed. Like, there's so much work to be done. But this is probably a longer conversation about the implementation of the 20-point plan and which I think there is a short amount of time to say, like, well, they're not disarming. What do we do about that? There is a shelf life on that before it gets pushed into the realm of just kicking the can down because it's too hard. I don't think that's where we're at now. But there is a risk later to be in that realm of nobody wants to see an operation begin again. And to include, this is more your expertise, within the Israeli society. I mean, Israel is tired. It has been fighting nonstop since October 7th. It's definitely safer, but I don't think it's that, I'm not of the belief that can go on forever.
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to spend just a couple of minutes on a third front. I know that I said we'd speak about two, but you do bring some significant data points with regard to what's going on against Hezbollah. And again, I'm quoting, you say that according to IDF reporting, more than 1,700 Hezbollah fighters have been eliminated, more than 2,500 aircraft sorties conducted, over 5,000 targets struck from the air, and more than 14,900 artillery strikes have been carried out against Hezbollah targets in Beirut, the Bekaa Valley, and southern Lebanon, hitting command rooms, intelligence headquarters, and operational planning centers. So this is particularly interesting to me because I want you to take on a specific aspect of the discourse, namely that in the midst of a ceasefire, Israel is safer from a national security perspective. Because I think that there's a tendency among some people to say, well, there's a contradiction here. On the one hand, John Spencer is arguing that Israel's safer from a position of national security, and I've already read out how you've defined national security. People can go back and look at that. But you're also saying, make no mistake, however, the threats still exist. So assess for us why we're in a safer position from a national security viewpoint when it comes to Hezbollah, in your view, if that is your view, and what threats still remain. And then I think I'm going to tee up our next conversation with just a few comments after you give your response.
Sure. And again, in order to have this critical thinking perspective of, we'd have to read out the status quo as of October 6th, before Hezbollah joined Hamas on October 8th and started firing immense amounts of rockets, because it was able to. It had the capability. It had built a massive, not just rocket arsenal, but even the pre-positioning of forces, as I've been and I've seen all along, literally within throwing distance of Israel's border communities. Everybody realizes that now. But if you would have taken people back, like, what do you mean that Hezbollah has a rocket that's or a rifle pointed at Israeli homes across the border, and it's allowed to be like that? I thought there was a whole, UN Security Council resolution 1701 about Hezbollah not there, all of this. And I won't correct you. I want to add something to what you said in the opening comments, is that there is no ceasefire with Hezbollah. There is a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. And everybody that I talk to they'll start to migrate towards Hezbollah as an entity. It absolutely is an entity that is embedded, thanks to Islamic regime in Iran, money, which is, you can't talk about how is the status of the threat of Hezbollah without adding in Syria, and what Syria was doing, and how Hezbollah was helping Assad stay in power, and how much money, weapons were flowing to it freely, uninterrupted and unable to be uninterrupted by Israel or anyone else. And then the status of the Islamic regime, like we just covered. That is, as much as I look at Israel's allies, Hezbollah's allies, to include its teeth in the Lebanese society, is all a factor. So today, and I know I need to be short, Hezbollah, of course, its years of, its leadership is gone. It's all of its connections which keep it strong are broken, degraded, if not destroyed. Its supplies have been destroyed. Its rockets that are this ultimate threat that factor into risk of taking actions against it. You do have a Lebanese government. Of course, we wanted to, in the last ceasefire, to see what would play out, right? The Lebanese army actually doing activities to disarm, but you've had the Lebanese government kick out the IRGC leadership. You've had multiple operations that are all a factor of what is Hezbollah today, this terror state within a state, and how has Israel's actions impacted that and made it safer on its northern border, right? What is the buffer to that threat? Of course, the rockets are farther and farther reaching. So even the ideals of the Litani River, why was that decided? Because of the range of the rockets at the time. All is a factor. So hopefully that is enough to say legitimately, no, even just if you just do northern Israel, is in a safer location. Israel is in these 5 strategic sites that are terrain does matter. And you and I have talked about this with, the length of Israel's borders and why it can never kind of give away its national security. You can say the same about the North and the strategic security and the depth of the enemy, the capabilities of the enemy, while we try to, and I think the world wants, and Lebanese, I want the Lebanese people to be free of Hezbollah and that there be enough safety within themselves to be able to do that, which is very complex, decades of, to include they have political seats in the government, all of these things. But from an Israel perspective, it is, of course, safer today on the northern border because Hezbollah is weaker, has fewer options for strategic survival. And for while it tries to survive, it will ultimately, of course, still be there. And we've had this talk with, the ideal of killing the ideology of Hamas in Gaza versus, there are lots of people that hate other people and there are lots of people that hate Israel. Doesn't mean they have a terror army within walking distance of communities in northern Israel that just don't today. And there is a much longer aspect of what does this mean for Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and others as we go forward, which is the uncertainty of that. But today, the northern Israel, Lebanon has a chance. Northern Israel is safer. I think that's pretty straightforward.
Well, John, thank you very much indeed. I'm going to ask you as we record this to come back on because I'm going to actually next time present some counterpoints to your very important points here. I want to reiterate that people should read this article. I think it's exceptionally well researched. It's exceptionally well presented as everybody would expect from you. Some of the areas that unfortunately we don't have time to get into, but I don't believe in announcing disagreements in the absence of my interlocutor. Frankly, if people were to see us when we've been on tour on various occasions or when we've sat in cafes in Israel, we'll agree, we'll disagree. It's part of what makes our friendship and our association so fruitful in my estimation. There are some very real questions that next time I want us to tackle. The first one is, there is a very clear understanding by our enemies that Israel is not able to fight a multi-front war in the way that I believe it presented its capabilities to be. Now, that last part is very important. We can fight a multi-front war. We are doing so, but not in the way that it was perceived we were capable of doing. There's obviously an issue of manpower and a lack of manpower, more precisely, that's been exposed by way of this war. There is a severe lack within Israel of internal domestic cohesion. There is also the problem of Israel fighting alongside the world's only superpower and not being able in this limited fashion of the prosecution of the war. And what's gone on in Iran, while incredible in terms of what America and Israel have launched together, as you rightly point out in your article, nobody should misconstrue that for being either of these militaries fighting at their maximum capabilities. It's simply not the case. But as things currently stand, we've not been able to bring Iran to heel. That should be room for real concern. And my biggest concern right now, John, is I'm very worried that Israel is allowing itself to enter into, in the event that the ceasefire holds with Iran, a reality whereby we see the mowing of the lawn phenomenon, that which you spoke about at the beginning of our conversation, where periodically we would go into Gaza in very limited fashion. We'd launch an operation from the air in very limited fashion as part of this rocket diplomacy, this ping pong that you said Ambassador Dermer spoke of. I'm very concerned that now that we have aggression from sovereign Iranian territory into sovereign Israeli territory by way of the ballistic missile attacks, that we're going to see this mowing of the lawn come about, but on steroids, something that I don't think is a tenable viewpoint or perspective or doctrine for Israel under the current circumstances, or frankly, under any circumstances. So there's a lot to discuss, but I want to say that I thought your article was a brilliant analysis. Again, it's in the show notes, and I look forward to having that discussion with you next time. Are you game for that conversation?
Of course, there's so much there that we could talk about.
Great. John, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you, and I look forward to next time. Thanks for joining the conversation today.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for listening to this episode of the show. Listen, if you're enjoying this content, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and to click the bell icon. Doing so really does help us to reach an ever wider audience, and it ensures that you get all of our analysis right away as soon as it's published. And if you are in the New York area, I want to invite you to register for the annual MirYam Institute International Security Briefing taking place on Wednesday, May 13th in Midtown Manhattan. Our speaker on that occasion is none other than General Mike Kurilla, the immediate past commander of U.S. Central Command, that which is responsible for the Middle East and North Africa. It's going to be an exceptional speech, an exceptional presentation, and it could not be more timely given events in the region. So if you want to register for that, go to our website and click on the events tab. Thank you, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.